Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are now entering day 30 of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and we'll jump right in and we'll start with our coverage and the fighting that is taking place and continues to take place. So, first and foremost, we have seen the Ukrainian military attempt to launch counterattacks along the western areas of Kiev in a direction towards the north by northeast towards the position of Russian forces that continue to operate just to the north and northwest of Kiev. The information that we have, the Russians were in fact able to hold off that Ukrainian counterattack and again inflict casualties upon the Ukrainians, and indeed the Russians suffered casualties as well. In the areas to the east of the Dnieper River, the Russians continued an operation towards Kiev, again in the direction of Brovary. And again, that operation met with stifling resistance from the Ukrainians. So, within the last 24 hours, we have seen the Ukrainians attempt a limited counter-offensive operation on the western bank of the Dnieper River, and we have seen the Russians continue to try and mount operations towards Kiev. And again, we're kind of in that realm of stalemate until and if and when the Russians can properly wear down the Ukrainian forces to continue to advance. And in all likelihood, that's going to be very, very challenging given the assistance that the Ukrainians are receiving from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and specifically the United States, Poland, United Kingdom, and other NATO allies. In other areas, we continue to see a very, very heavy fighting taking place from Donetsk to Luhansk. This area in the northeast of the area of operations right now is probably seeing some of the heaviest and continued fighting of the conflict. And we're also seeing the forces of the Novorossiya militias continuing to advance, be it at very, very small amounts of areas per day. Again, they're looking at maybe 2 to 8 kilometers advance per day by these forces, by these Russian separatist forces, and in conjunction with regular Russian army units. I think for now, because they are, for all intents and purposes, led by Russian officers, you could quite literally consider that force a component of the Russian military. And again, what I mean by the forces that one would consider the separatist forces from Donetsk and Luhansk. In Mariupol, the Russians continue to advance into the downtown areas of Mariupol. It's also being reported that senior leadership individuals of both the Ukrainian military and civil government have possibly fled Mariupol. And again, we estimate that there are between 5,000 and 7,000 Ukrainian forces of various types, ranging from territorial defense units on up to naval infantry, Azov regimental units, and regular Ukrainian military, to include special operations forces as well. And we do know that the Ukrainians are still utilizing main battle tanks in downtown Mariupol. And we're continuing to see a heavy use of Russian National Guard forces continuing to operate, and also Chechen forces as well inside of Mariupol. To the southwest, Berdyansk. Again, that was a very, very embarrassing moment for the Russian military, in which we observed 3 ships getting attacked. These were amphibious warfare ships. One was, again, apparently struck, and from the video evidence that has been provided, it would appear that ship was destroyed. In fact, one of the other vessels, one of the two other vessels that fled the area as this attack was underway, one of those vessels was clearly on fire, with another one of those vessels apparently smoking, and quite possibly on fire, or had just put out a fire that occurred on its deck. But at least the second ship that was on fire as it departed did not look in good condition, and it looked like a very sizable fire was raging on the vessel. And again, the Alligator class, the larger amphibious warfare ship that was docked, was utterly destroyed, and we're trying to ascertain what happened to the two other vessels as well, because we suspect that at least one other vessel may have in fact sunk, or is just in such bad shape from fire and explosive damage that it is no longer operational. They may have to abandon ship. Either they've done that or are in the process of quite possibly doing that. It would appear that in the Mikolai area of operation, we do have a lull in some of the engagements. We have seen some of the Russian forces pull back to closer to Kherson, and we have seen, again, limited Ukrainian counterattacks within the vicinity of both Mikolai and Kherson. But we estimate right now this map may have changed a bit, with the Russian forces pulling back more towards Kherson. And obviously, if the Russians are unable to either seal off Mykolaiv or in fact capture Mykolaiv, it's going to be very, very difficult for Russian forces to eventually move on Odessa. And it would appear that is an objective at some point. But right now, here at MFAN, we really don't see the Russians having the capability of moving on Odessa anytime soon. And I don't think it's in the cards at this moment. I do believe that after Mykolaiv is taken, and if that occurs, obviously once Mariupol falls, that is going to open up new options for the Russian military, as they will definitely able to deploy more forces to different areas of the areas of operation. But right now, it looks like the Russians, at least in terms of making a focused effort or renewed efforts towards Mykolaiv, and then again moving on towards Odessa, that there's a pause right now for that movement. Also of great concern for the Russian militaries, obviously I've talked about this in previous episodes, is the loss of leadership within the Russian ranks, and we continue to see that. I think we're up to around 5 Russian general officers who have been KIA'd, and also a very significant issue for the Russians, up to 5 lieutenant colonels and colonels of the elite VDV, the Russian Airborne Forces, which obviously are a leading component of this continued operation by the Russians. But again, 5 of these field-grade officers, these lieutenant colonels and colonels, have also been KIA'd, that were regimental or deputy regimental commanders of the VDV forces that have been confirmed. Not going to go into individual names of those personnel at this point, because again, we have to confirm that those individuals have in fact been KIA. But again, it would appear, or it's being reported from multiple sources, quite possibly that is the case in terms of those losses by the VDV forces as well. But right now, I would say that in terms of the ongoing conflict, the Russians right now are obviously in a bit of a pickle in terms of continuing to conduct operations. We're continuing to see tactical aircraft. We're continuing to see the Russian military and the Eastern Separatist forces continue to push again within the vicinity of Luhansk and Donetsk, and in fact are making headway in those areas. And again, we can expect to see Mariupol fall relatively soon, I would say. It's going to be very, very difficult for those Ukrainian forces to continue to hold out. But again, in some of these other cities, again, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, we continue to see the Ukrainian forces hold out and offer a very good bit of resistance against the Russians. And right now, we're kind of in that realm of a war of attrition. Now, the question is how long can the Ukrainians hold out with this kind of tempo of operations in terms of both fixed-wing assets and continued use of heavy artillery and long-range artillery as well. Again, although not reported and what would be considered a state secret by the Ukrainians, again, the Ukrainians very much enjoy talking about Russian casualties, but you hear very, very little about Ukrainian casualties. Which again, I can understand kind of where they're coming from, but at the same time, it does give doubt in terms of the truthfulness in reporting some of the Russian casualties that in fact the Ukrainians are reporting. And I would say that if the Ukrainians are reporting X amount of Russian KIA or wounded, I would suspect that the Ukrainian casualties are just as high. And again, you're just not looking at ground combat. Again, a lot of the Russian casualties, one, are coming from artillery, direct ground operations, meaning anti-tank guided weapon systems, artillery fire, tank versus tank versus other armored fighting vehicle, infantry against infantry, and just the normal casualties you would get in ground warfare. But at the same time, again, as I talked about before, the Ukrainians are getting a lot more of the Russian tactical aircraft component, meaning large munitions being dropped on them, the use of helicopter gunships, a multitude of different types of helicopter gunships, and obviously that tactical aircraft asset that continues to attack the Ukrainians. And that is taking a toll on the Ukrainians, and also obviously the cruise missiles as well. So you have to envision that because of that, the Ukrainian casualties have to be on par with reported Russian casualties, which I would suspect. And I would say at this point, it's going to be difficult for the Ukrainians to continue to sustain the kind of casualties that we're seeing in this very, very high tempo war right now. I think we're starting to see a bit of battle fatigue. Both of these forces have been fighting for 30 days now, and obviously both sides are indeed taking casualties, at times heavy casualties. But again, because of the lack of reporting in terms of what is being reported by the West, by the Ukrainians themselves, it's very, very difficult to ascertain just how vast the Ukrainian casualties are. And again, based on information coming out of the battle space to include frontline reporters going into Ukrainian morgues and visually articulating and saying that they've seen large amounts of Ukrainian casualties, especially in Mikolai, and I can understand on the flip side, some are saying these are Russian casualties. But if they're showing up in a Ukrainian morgue, more likely than not, they're probably Ukrainian casualties. It is not that. It is much more easier for the Ukrainians to gather up their dead and wounded versus the Ukrainians gathering the Russian dead and wounded. That would mean if the Ukrainians were doing that, they were either A, advancing, and B, they were going into the Russian lines and getting these Russian deads. Now I understand that in terms of some of these convoy ambushes that have occurred, obviously they can do that. But when you're at sometimes dealing with very, very defined lines within this conflict, the concept of the Ukrainian forces gathering Russian dead is ludicrous. Again, the ability to do that with your own forces can be difficult at times, much less going over to near the enemy lines and gathering those forces as well. So that's why I don't hold much merit in terms of information coming in that claims that many of the dead seen in the morgues in Mykolaiv are Russian. Doesn't make any sense. Does make sense. It's absolutely Ukrainian, maybe a few Russian, but again, more or less, the Ukrainians first and foremost are going to gather their dead and wounded, and not Russian. That would come later, obviously, if the front lines change. But again, as this fighting continues, if there are Russian casualties, and when there are Russian casualties, which there are, most of the time they are going to be gathered by Russian forces themselves as well. But that's kind of where we're sitting right now. I want to look at one more thing here real quick. We continue to see also, again, and I think this is fairly common knowledge, that it continues, that the shelling in the vicinity of Kharkiv and again Sumy and obviously Chernihiv continues, and it continues unabated. We've heard that from Ukrainian sources that the Russians could quite possibly run out of ammunition and certain amounts of supplies within the next 3 days. I would say that's highly dubious. Again, you have to understand. I mean, at one point, the Russian military had prepared for war with the West. So the concept that it is completely out of ammunition or is in dire need of ammunition 30 days after its war with Ukraine, I would say that's fairly dubious. I think obviously there could be challenges with precision-guided munitions. There could be challenges in some case with certain types of ammunition, whatever that could be. But I think generally speaking, the Russian military is a fairly well equipped military in terms of having vast sums of munitions that it can use for its forces. And specifically, I think we're looking at heavy artillery and 122, 152 millimeter caliber, obviously 125 millimeter tank rounds for its tanks, obviously ammo for individual weapons and so forth and so on. I don't see the Russians running out of those types of equipment. And at the same time, in terms of some of these more costlier systems, such as the Iskander, such as the Caliber, such as the KH-101 air-launched cruise missiles, I would think that the Russians have designated a certain amount for this conflict, and they could be running out of those type of munitions designated for this specific conflict. But the Russians would also have had a reserve component too for the prospects of a possible war with the West that it also keeps. Now, I understand a lot of Russian units have been deployed in this conflict, and right now we're probably seeing upwards to 70% of all Russian active duty combat battalions being deployed to this area of operations. But again, the idea that it's running out of supplies and ammo, I think is a little bit ridiculous. Now, maybe they have to move ammunition and certain supplies from other areas of the country. Obviously, that's going to occur. And at the same time, the Russian manufacturing capability is going to kick in at some point. They are going to go into that total war mode where they are starting to produce the systems and equipment that they're going to need to continue operations. And I think you really have to harken back to, again, to World War II. And I understand there was Lend-Lease, but at the same time, if we visit the German-Russian War from 41 to 42, obviously during that period of the conflict, many persons in the West, many analysts in the West, many generals in the West believed the Russians were going to be defeated. Now, fast forward to 44, 45, that situation changed rather remarkably. And again, that whole concept of a Russian defeat was quickly marginalized, and then it very clearly became apparent that the Russians were going to be victorious, especially going into 44. So again, what you see now in terms of what is happening on the battlefield, that is not the way this may look in the months ahead, depending on if there's some sort of political solution that arises. So again, what is happening now on the battlefield may look quite a bit different as we move forward into this conflict. And again, because of the support by the West, my understanding is the Russian military is enraged, as is the Russian political powers as well. Again, enraged by the support that the West is giving to Ukraine. Again, not just weapon systems, but quite possibly, well, not quite possibly, active intelligence sharing and very, very important intelligence sharing in terms of signal intelligence, the locations of battlefield commanders. That's probably why we're seeing some of these Russian field grade officers and general officers that have been KIA'd. Again, a lot of that is because of direct Western support. Again, in terms of signal intelligence, in terms of human intelligence, and then obviously satellite intelligence as well. And again, the concept of these early warning aircraft that are able to notify the Ukrainians as Russian aircraft enter Ukrainian airspace. And that's probably why you have not seen, or you continue to see, the Ukrainian air defenses as continuing to be viable because they're being directly supported by long-range early warning aircraft from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And again, that has the Russians incredibly angered. And there's reports now, very concerning reports, that the West, specifically the United States, could be subject to a massive cyber attack, or quite possibly something else as well. So we'll continue to watch that and keep an eye on it. Again, the gravitational pull of this conflict is more or less heading to something quite possibly bigger than what it currently is. Now that could change, but right now, it doesn't look good, and obviously and rightfully so. I mean, the Russians have a right to be agitated by what is happening inside of Ukraine in terms of Western assistance to the Ukrainians. I think if the shoe was on the other foot, and you kind of saw the same sort of support maybe in Iraq that the Ukrainians are getting from the Russians in terms of their possible assistance to the Iraqis, and this is just hypothetical, back during the Iraq War. Obviously, I think American forces and American political leadership would also be incredibly angry. And that's not to say that the Russians didn't support the Iraqis, and I think a lot of that was done in a more covert manner. But what is happening right now in Ukraine is a much more overt manner, and it is being done in the open and with the direct support of a lot of these Western nations in terms of fighting the Russians. So again, that's kind of where we sit right now. I know this was a kind of long-winded content for today. But again, that's kind of where we sit, and it continues, and obviously we'll continue to report as events warrant here in the very, very near future. Have a good day, everybody.